My name is Sasha. I'm a facilitator at the Douglas College Community Employment Program and as well as the STEAM program. I also do that development. I've been in this industry for over 10 years working with neurodiverse individuals and people with various types of exceptionalities. My background is in child and youth care counseling and education assistance, so adaptive education is really key in my role.
Hi everyone, I'm Jamie Miller-Dixon. I'm a human resources consultant and I lead an initiative here in BC called BC Partners in Workforce Innovation. We help connect employers who are committed to workforce inclusion of people with disabilities, those with diverse abilities. We work with employers and recruit for them. It just happens to be from a very unique talent pool. And we're just expanding as of April 1st from BC to Ontario. So we'll be ramping up our services to work with employers there as well.
Hello everyone, my name is Jenna Gauthier. So I manage the Autism CanTech Center and Program at Northwest College. Autism CanTech is a national program funded in part by the Government of Canada through the Youth Employment Skills Strategy. And we're a 6-month program that trains autistic youth between the ages of 18 to 30 in technical skills, and then they go out into a paid work integrated learning to really apply those skills, and we support them to bridge into employment. I also have a background in occupational therapy and have been working with individuals with various exceptionalities for many years, and it's been an absolute privilege. I'm really excited to be here today.
I'm Heather McCain. I am founder and executive director of Creating Accessible Neighborhoods. It's a nonprofit I started because of my own experiences with inaccessibility and ableism. I am neurodivergent myself. I have ADHD and have sensory issues. Our organization is for disabled people by disabled people, and that is very important to us. And we do workshops and help people understand about experiences with disability and neurodivergence.
Thank you so much, you guys. So on this topic, I guess what everyone really wants to know is what is neurodiversity? And Creating Accessible Neighborhoods has come up with a really wonderful definition of this, and I'd like to read it out for you guys. So neurodiversity is the idea that neurological differences like autism, ADHD, Tourette's, learning disabilities, etc. are natural differences in the human experience, just as race, gender, and sexuality are differences as well. Science has increasingly backed this up by showing how stable these conditions have been throughout human history. Neurodiversity focuses on the need for accommodation and assistance rather than on trying to cure medically. It celebrates and recognizes that it is a part of human existence as opposed to saying people with these conditions are less than or in need of being cured, a message they get all too often. Talking of curing attacks this person's very essence or being. A person who is neurodiverse deserves to be accepted and supported as they are, not forced into being like others or passing as non-disabled or fitting the societal ideal. Neurodiversity can also include acquired disabilities like post-traumatic stress disorder, traumatic brain injuries, people who have had strokes, and other disabilities that happen after birth. Again, this is the definition created by Creating Accessible Neighborhoods. So on that note, I think it's really important for us to talk about why is neurodiversity so important in the tech industry? Who wants to take that?
Okay, I'll start, I guess. Our program is called Autism CanTech. I think where neurodiversity, just like including a diverse workforce is important, is it gives you diversity of thought, it gives you different perspectives, it allows organizations to start problem solving in new ways. So we're looking at, speakers yesterday were talking more about AI and the metaverse and all these amazing technological advances, and people aren't doing those in these little silos, they're doing those on big teams collaborating with all these different ways of viewing the world and all these different areas of expertise, and they're learning from each other to create amazing things. And this is where I think neurodiversity comes into play, and creating spaces for these individuals comes into play, is when you have that different lens coming in and you have that diversity of thought and a different way of viewing the world and the work, you're going to get different things done, you're going to see more efficient teams, you're going to see more productive teams and new ways of doing things. I think of one of our students, he was once told he would never work. Somebody had told him he'd never work, and he was hired by a large financial institution out of our program. And within the first couple of weeks, he had created a new, more efficient process for their data analytics team. This is an individual that, graduated high school, had no post-secondary, had never really seen himself in tech, but had a passion for it. And so I think there's so much amazing potential in these young people when we create opportunities for them and create accessible spaces. Now I will get off my soapbox, sorry, and I will pass it on.
Yeah, I don't know if any of you know or have heard of Randy Lewis. He was Senior Vice President at Walgreens who brought in a diversity initiative within the organization. And one of Randy's sons also has autism. And one of the things he always says is, when you've met a person with autism, you've met a person with autism. So some of the unique strengths that I've observed in BC WIN over the past 8 years doesn't apply to everybody, because each one of us is unique and different, and we bring various strengths and abilities to whatever roles we take on in life. But some of the more notable qualities is a high attention to detail, that detail orientation, that different ways of looking at a problem, so some problem solving skills, loyal, honest. You ask a question, you will get a straight answer. You won't get the long-winded story, you won't get the lies that might be told with it, but that honesty is a very strong trait. We've seen people, for example, go into positions in not just coders and developers in the IT section, but also people going into financial roles, so finance, accounting, business analysts. So it's not just a stereotypical person going into coding.
I'll also add that there are already people who are neurodivergent at workplaces, and so it is good for the organizations and businesses to find out how communication works, not only for those who may be coming on board, but also for those who are already there. And when you create an environment where neurodivergent people are supported and there is open conversation about communication, it helps neurotypical people as well, because it challenges them to think about their own communication skills and how they socialize. And it creates an environment that has conversations that allow for people to be who they are. And I think, when people are able to be authentic, they are bringing the best of themselves to a workplace. When they have to kind of partition themselves off, our focus is on people with disabilities and intersecting identities. And so we have, members who are told to turn down their queerness or not be so black. And so it's when you're allowed to be your authentic self, you're bringing more to that job. You will remain more loyal. You will encourage other people to join the company. You will look for more opportunities because you are being supported, and therefore you want everyone else to succeed as well.
Thank you so much for that. As you were talking, I was thinking along the same lines, so you kind of hit all of the things I was going to say. But I think it really expands for the employer that kind of word of mouth. What are you like as an employer? How does this look for you? And I think it expands the opportunities that employers come up with and that staff bring to the workplace when they have that support in place. They can really expand and grow, and it brings the company to new levels in that aspect as well, which is fantastic. So in talking about these, we've talked about a lot of this strength, and so in doing this, creating these adaptive workplaces and places that are more progressive and more inclusive, what are some of the challenges that can come up for neurodivergent individuals and also for the employer in making these kind of practices and accommodations?
One of the challenges is that people often will get into diversity, equity, and accessibility without knowing the who and the why. So, for example, my organization has been hired by the City of Vancouver to do disability awareness training for all levels of staff. And this came out of the fact that they are working on accessibility, but if they don't know what accessibility is and who it's for, and the broad spectrum of disability, then what they're doing will remain something that is not meeting the needs of those who are disabled and neurodivergent. And so we want them to know what that broad spectrum is, because so many people have a very narrow view of what disability is, and also that awareness about ableism and how it shows up in society and workplaces is something that's not talked about. And so I think one of the challenges is to really focus on why are we doing diversity, and not just why is it good for the company, but why is it good for each of the individuals that are coming on board. And as a collective, I think that's really important as well. Like, you know, there are people who are undiagnosed and people who have been diagnosed but don't know about their neurodivergence, who can have the opportunity to learn more through workplaces, better understanding diversity, better understanding how ableism shows up, and having these conversations.
I like that. I think I'm reflecting on, some of the conversation this morning about unconscious bias, and I think a lot of individuals that we serve, there's, a lot of neuronormative expectations through the hiring process, through post-secondary education, transitioning and bridging into employment, actually being in employment. When you think of being here and needing to network, and sometimes these kinds of spaces aren't accessible spaces for neurodiverse individuals, or they don't showcase strengths. But if that's how you're going to advance in your career, how do you advance in your career if that's the expectation? And so when I think of like challenges or barriers, I think of and I'm sure many of you have heard this, like the bias in hiring practices. A lot of the individuals we serve, they don't necessarily showcase very well in an interview. And so, they don't get their foot in the door because of how those practices are structured. Or when, as a manager, you're working with HR and you're crafting your job posting or the posting for a co-op, are you really thinking about the actual skills that are required for that role? If you had somebody in that role break down their job, what do they tangibly need to be able to do? Do they need to have all those soft skills, as they're called, or do they not? What hard skills do they require? What technical skills are required? I think of, it's actually starting to happen more and more, but having those statements where you're opening doors, requesting for certain populations or certain people to apply, like these are how we can start to tackle some of that. But I see a lot of barriers in even getting in the door, and historic barriers too. So, this morning we heard about barriers within post-secondary for some of our students. It's even getting in because of barriers they face in primary education systems. And so it's a lot to tackle, but I see a lot of movement in this space starting to create opportunities. And when I think about some of the conversations from yesterday, talking about the need to do certifications matter so much. What are the skills? Can we really look at those specific skills instead? I think that will allow a lot of individuals with exceptionalities, a lot of neurodivergent individuals to start showcasing themselves. And as we start shifting human resources practices and the way we're hiring, I think that will also help them overcome those barriers and move into those spaces. I went off topic, but Jamie, over here.
No, I thought you did great. Sets up the next piece really nicely. Just to further what Jenna was talking about, honestly, for the employers in the room, the hiring decision makers and HR team members in the room, it's the recruitment and retention practices that actually are the barrier and present the greatest challenges, right? If we're using those behavior-based interviews, right, which, by the way, I remember when they came in, they were designed to, when there was an abundance of talent on the market, they were designed to screen people out as opposed to screen people in. Those behavior-based interviews, the way they're structured, can you tell me about a time when you went out of your way to solve a complicated problem? What's the question you're asking, really asking? So moving away from behavior-based interviews, having more of a conversation approach. And by the way, that feels better as the interviewer as well, if you're asking questions that actually feel better to ask. The other one is psychometric testing. If you're using those personality tests, can be very tricky for people who are neurodiverse in particular. It's the way the questions, again, are structured in the abstract nature of it. And so in completing those assessments, somebody has to go, do I strongly agree? Do I agree? Am I neutral on this? It doesn't matter. It doesn't really give you an indication of how well that person is going to work on the job. And then, so that whole piece of, that upfront piece prevents people from getting in the door. But then once hired, often the most adjustment that a person who's neurodiverse requires in the workplace once hired is not to be seated in the center high traffic area of the office where there's a lot of distraction, easy distraction, but also to have regular check-ins. How am I doing? Having some feedback. But ultimately, if you provide a respectful, caring workplace where the focus is on abilities in relation to an opportunity, where people can come in and do their best work, that's going to take you a long way with retention. And what organization these days isn't focused on retention? Because where's our workforce coming from these days, right? With workforce shortages. I think I went off too.
We like that around here. Both of the things you said, both Jamie and Jenna, these match a lot with what we do in our program at Douglas College, especially with our CAVE youth. And a lot of them come in, and Jenna, as you said, post-secondary is a barrier. A lot of our students come in and they don't have their high school because the pandemic, moving into online curriculum, was so inaccessible for a lot of these kids. And a lot of them come from lower socioeconomic status, where they have a lot of stuff at home going on. There's a lot of back home things happening. There's no space for them to sit. So a lot of them didn't complete their high school, and that became a barrier. And even now, basic things like grocery stores are looking for, they're looking for high school as a requirement. If they're not in the high school age group, then why do I need high school to work a cash register if I have the skills to do that? So there's a lot of barriers coming up in that capacity, and getting into the post-secondary field, and then they come in and they say, Sasha, I don't have volunteer work, I don't have any work history, but I really want to get a job and I need to be able to support myself. And so the job market becomes really, really inaccessible for them, especially when they have neurodiversities. And then there's the social factor. They're now anxious because they've lost those social pieces along the way. And then they have to sit in an interview and they say, I got the interview, but I didn't get the job, because the interviews aren't set up for their success either. So it all ties into each other and changes how this looks. So talking about, one of the things that we do within our program is we try to open the doors with employers for them and bridge that gap. And something that we're looking more into is that work integrated learning structure. So how do we build that structure for education for employers, and can the tech sector help optimize the future of the workplace for neurodiverse people? How do we optimize that and bridge into that work integrated learning?
Okay, I'm gonna start and then I know it's so much me, I'm so sorry. I'm taking the mic away. I think about what we do to, get our students into work integrated learning, and I was thinking about what you said, Jamie. We say that a lot when you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism, and it's a very individual matching process. Like the employer partner who wants to host the student, they send us a job description. Our career development team works along with them to make sure that anything that needs clarity, any of the activities are clarified. Our career coaches have been working alongside our students, they know them well. It's a very individualized matching process to make sure that it's an optimal fit on both sides. But our students don't meet their employer partner until a lot of that's been smoothed out. That has been figured out, and then they have coffee chats. They actually do a video interview with support from their career coach, so it's more of a recorded video that they send in so that they're not faced in that moment. They have time to prepare, they have time to showcase themselves in a way that allows them to be their authentic selves, showcase skills if they would like. And the way we support employers is we make sure that we're providing training. We will ask them about their needs. We have mandatory training they have to take in order for them to host a student. And then we also have an inclusion and accessibility consultant that will work with industry and employers free of charge for when taking students to really help them make sure they're setting students up for success when it comes to that work integrated learning. It's also really important, I think you were talking about like having frequent touch points and all of those things. So our students are often like quite terrified to go to work. Many of them have never had the opportunity. So they do need that support sometimes to help them feel like they can. Having a consistent supervisor, having somebody who creates a space of psychological safety for them to be vulnerable and acknowledge when they don't know how to do something so that they can be taught. Otherwise, sometimes they will freeze and then it becomes a performance issue, but it's because they don't feel safe to be vulnerable. So creating these safe spaces that are supported with mentorship and informed mentorship, people who want to do the work alongside these individuals, we found has created a really successful environment. And also allowing employer partners to be vulnerable, allowing them to come back to us with questions for clarity, to normalize that sometimes things can be tricky, and to help them navigate what is often a new space when you're looking at hosting and hiring individuals with diverse needs. Now I'm gonna pass it off to
I think that we often encourage employers to kind of think about who gets to set the parameters of good behavior and professionalism, because often the ways that I need to be in spaces is what is seen as bad behavior or unprofessional. So examples include that because of my PTSD, I have to read off of my iPad for when I do speeches and workshops. And I've been turned down by some conferences who say that's not professional, that you should be able to memorize your work. I have to use STEM toys. Oftentimes what happens is that the environments and people that overwhelm me then punish me for doing what I need to do for myself to self-regulate and be in that space. And so we really want employers to understand, like, what do they consider professionalism and why was this set up this way? And oftentimes it's to gatekeep positions of power. And they are often made, these rules, by people who aren't diverse, who don't have disabilities and neurodivergence, and so we really need to question that. Eye contact is another one. I had a negative physiological response to eye contact. But that's been seen as dishonest. You know, people who need to use their computers to take notes, there's university classes still where you're not allowed to do that. I do like one person on TikTok, what they did, their professor said nobody could bring their computers because they could be on the internet. So this guy brought a really noisy typewriter. He took notes on his typewriter. So this is the thing, is that, you know, I think we really encourage the employers to think about their spaces. We also encourage them to say safer spaces instead of safe spaces, because for a lot of our members, especially those who have trauma, there are no safe spaces for them. So safe sounds like a promise that can't be met, whereas safer sounds like something that they're working towards and that they understand the complexities of people who have experienced trauma, who have disabilities, and who have not been experiencing the spaces, as you were talking about, those workspaces where they can be themselves.
Thank you, that was great. Something that I like that you touched on was about kind of what does that professional look like? And for me, something that I practice in my day-to-day is that I don't go into my classroom dressed highly business-like, because to me it creates a really unfair power dynamic between myself and students, and they don't see me as somebody that they can go to that will be understanding when we create those power dynamics. So it's really something tangible that I can do that makes everyone feel included, and it doesn't single out any one student who maybe doesn't come from a background background like that, or maybe hasn't interacted with somebody of maybe a higher professional kind of position. So sometimes that physical appearance can be a little bit of an intimidation factor for them. So while I dress professionally at work, I'm not dressed, in a full business suit when I teach a class, because it's not what works well for my students. So I get better feedback that way. So what are maybe some other tangible things that employers could do to create safer spaces for students and make it so that students don't feel singled out, that it's something that could be an advantage for all students?
There's an acronym I like, INCUP, it's for people who have ADHD, and they're motivators. And the more you can stack these motivators, the more you'll be able to get out of someone who has ADHD. And as someone who has ADHD, I can verify it. And so INCUP stands for interest, novelty, challenge, urgency, and passion. So the more you can stack those, the better that person is able to perform. So for example, I cannot do things unless it's at the very last minute. I have never been able to force my brain to do things in advance, and if I do, there's no motivation, and it's just me kind of cycling in madness. And so I need that urgency. I need that external deadline. We have some of our members who actually work online with someone else. They're not talking to each other. They're not, kind of working together, but they are keeping each other accountable to the fact that they have to work. And so that's the thing too, is like novelty is really important. So people who are neurodiverse often love working on things that are about adaptability, and people with disabilities, just because of how society is set up, we do have to be very adaptable. And so, yeah, I really like INCUP, and it's learning things like this that you can open up these conversations to have these tangible things that you can do. I think also the title I'm proudest of is PRIP doula, which is a disability justice term that's given to people by community that is for someone who helps disabled people navigate our complex systems, build resources, and find support. And I really encourage workplaces to have groups that are people of similar identities who can support people along their way. So we work with universities where we encourage them to have students who have previously gone through getting access accommodations, working with professors, having people that you can go and talk to, as you were saying about how you dress. It's great to make yourself more accessible, but if you can have people who have similar experiences, often people are more open to that. And the thing is that I became disabled at 17. There was no handbook on how to be disabled, and so just because someone has a disability or is neurodivergent doesn't mean that they know the tools that would help them. So being in community with others really helps to support them and to grow these conversations.
Tangible changes that an employer could do to make this space more inclusive.
Oh, okay, well, to go big and bold really quick, take a look at your policies and procedures. There's a lot of historical barriers built into policies and procedures. So, and so taking a look at those with a group of stakeholders, with people who have lived experience. Don't try and remake the wheel. Lean into people who know, build your network, and take a closer look and make changes, because by doing that, you actually can make some bigger changes within your organization that will support spaces for individuals. And I'm pretty sure this has already been said, but you already have neurodiverse individuals in your organizations. They have either told you or they haven't, and they're either doing okay or they're not. And you have a lot of individuals with a variety of experiences within your organizations. Taking a closer look at the way your policies and procedures are built to increase inclusion and accessibility will benefit everybody. whether they have exceptionalities or not. So that is, to me, a really easy change, well, not easy, but important change to make. And then the other one I would say is onboarding. The way you set the stage for people to come into your organization, helping them feel well oriented to your organization, their role, it's creating that foundation for how they are going to navigate your organization moving forward. It is going to help set the tone for whether they can be their authentic selves, whether they can be vulnerable with you, whether they can ask for things without needing to go through official accommodation procedures. So I think that's a really key piece that I would look at as like something tangible to change that everybody can do.
Oh, yes. One of the things that we encourage organizations and businesses to do is to create an accessibility protocol or an access need protocol. So this is a document that outlines what policies. Oftentimes companies have good policies around disability, but they don't actually share it with the staff. And so the staff don't know that that's something that they can ask for, and they don't necessarily ask for it without knowing that the company has it. And it also goes over what accessibility is offered, what accessibility they're working towards. Often we encourage like businesses to do a 1, 3, 5 year plan when it comes to accessibility. And this is good because when you talk about access needs, it benefits everyone. And unfortunately, our society is set up to meet the needs of some, and it's leaving others behind. And so having this access need guide is really good for everybody, and also everybody's getting the same information. And that's really important too, because often what happens is it's very patchworky. Like these people know this, these people know that, this person was offered these accommodations. And so it doesn't really actually help the entire environment. And the other thing that's really good about the accessibility protocols is not everyone has a diagnosis. There are a lot of barriers to diagnosis. Black people are less likely to be diagnosed with ADHD, and women are diagnosed less likely to receive accommodation or treatment. Studies have shown that women are given less time and attention by doctors to men. Autism was seen as very male-centric for a long time, which has led to the autistic community having phrases like autism is not a boys' club. And it leaves out a lot of women and gender non-conforming people in the diagnostic tools. So an accessibility protocol is also important because there may be people who don't know to ask for access needs because they don't feel officially disabled or officially neurodiverse. A lot of our members are diagnosed by social media. They've learned more through social media than they have through the medical system. But in a workplace, there is that feeling like if I don't have an official diagnosis, can I ask for this access need to be met? And so accessibility protocols really help to educate about what's available. And also it talks about the fact that the business understands accessibility is not a one and done. This is something that has to be ongoing and consistent, and that they're committed to it.
Wonderful. So we've talked about kind of this accessibility piece and how do we kind of bring it into this tangible place. So what is something that employers can do to invest in, recognize, and recruit neurodiverse talent?
There's something with you that we went through to see when. Thanks for the 5-minute warning from the back. Thank you so much. I'll keep it short. So about 4 years ago, we brought our employer partners together for a day for brainstorming, and we had, it was a day of beautiful chaos, and the whole challenge, the question for the day was, how do we make accessibility, diversity and inclusion work and work well? What does it take? So again, beautiful chaos, lots of flip charts, and by the time we diagnosed those flip charts and made sense of them, brought it all together, we saw very clearly that it takes 4 things, 4 key things. And we lovingly refer to that as the 4 pillars of accessible employment. Also using that as the foundation that we're making recommendations to Accessibility Standards Canada on recruitment and retention standards to support the new Accessible Canada Act. Those 4 key things: commitment, readiness, recruitment, and retention. Commitment in the past often starts with somebody in HR going, we should be hiring more people with disabilities, right? But that commitment really needs to start at the top. A good example here in the Lower Mainland, we've got the President's Group. Those are CEOs that are committed to workforce inclusion of people with disabilities. Commitment. Lots of activities under commitment as well, by the way. Readiness. We tend to jump, once somebody we should be hiring, we tend to jump straight to recruitment. We forget to do the work. We forget to help our organizations shift those practices that we've always done in the past, remove the barriers, and be in a better position to recruit, right? And then when we look at recruitment, it involves specific partnerships with organizations that are going to help you find that talent pool to fill the opportunities you have in your organization. Retention, an afterthought usually, but not to lose sight of the investment that you've just made in bringing a new person on board in your organization. So we lovingly refer to this as the 4 pillars of accessible employment: commitment, readiness, recruitment, and retention. And if you would like more information on that, I'm happy to share that with you.
Thank you. What was your question?
I had a question for Heather. I go to high school and I think that ableism really starts at that age. I was wondering if you had like an infinite budget, what tools would you implement in high schools to combat ableism?
Well, I would start in elementary school to begin with, because I already see the ableism that is there. I'm third parent to my friend's kid, and he's in grade 1, and I already see all these biases starting there. We really focus on hiring people of the identity to educate about that identity. We think empathy is great, but we don't want people to imagine themselves in our shoes. We want them to listen to our experiences and stories directly from us. And so I would say a lot of workshops about what ableism is. And ableism does not just affect disabled people. Ableism can affect people without disabilities as well. There's language ableism, so that's people who are looking down on those who speak English as an additional language. And I use English as an additional language instead of English as a second language because there's a Western bias there. Often people who speak English as an additional language already speak multiple other disability or languages. So it's not their second, it's their third, their fourth. And so we really want to educate from that level. And so getting into schools is definitely one of the goals that we're working towards. I think also just like empowering people with disabilities and neurodivergence from a young age. Because, for example, I had an intern from UBC who had never disclosed to anybody her neurodivergence. She worked with us for 3 months, and in her final presentation to the class, she told everyone what her neurodivergence was. Those 3 months were enough to help her have the confidence in herself. And I think the thing is that the programs that you do are so great, but how great would it be to not have that person think that they're unemployable in the first place, right? And I think also we really want to get into the medical system because the medical system is so ableist. They're into fixing us. And when they can't fix us, they get frustrated with us and make it seem like it's our fault. And so, and there's the barriers to even getting into diagnosis. Geographical locations, it's one thing in Vancouver, but if you're in Fort St. John, it's a whole other thing, right? So it's really getting into those systems and educating people. We work with UBC, educating first-year medical students about people with disabilities and people who are 2S LGBTQA+. And it's important that they learn these at the beginning and not kind of patchwork through their career. And I think also understanding that it's ongoing, right? Like I think what we see is people doing one workshop and being like, okay, we covered that one. Now let's move on to some other diverse identity. But it's doing workshops every year. It's doing the work in between. And so if I had an infinite budget, it would definitely be doing that work and hiring people who are disabled and neurodivergent. We're hoping by the end of this year to have our workshops online. And part of that is we want to encourage disabled and neurodivergent people who can't be at a specific time in a specific space to create their own workshops that would be online so they could still make money but they, don't have to be in front of an audience, and it can be more accessible to them. So if anybody wants to help with our, give us an infinite budget, you can donate.
Thank you so much. So I think we are just to have to wrap up here. This is a topic we all could go on for a very long time. So feel free to connect with us after as well. But just in conclusion, I want to say that hiring neurodivergent students for work integrated learning placements can bring so many benefits to businesses, particularly in improving their accessibility practices. Neurodivergent individuals may have unique perspectives, strengths, and problem-solving abilities that can enhance a business's approach to accessibility. This is particularly relevant for roles related to tech, where accessibility is becoming an increasingly important consideration. By engaging neurodivergent students in work-integrated learning placements, businesses can gain valuable insights into how to create more accessible products and services that meet the needs of diverse users. To improve their accessibility practices through work-integrated learning placements, businesses can start by developing supportive hiring practices that focus on the strengths and abilities of neurodivergent individuals. This might include using recruitment strategies that target neurodivergent candidates or working with disability employment services to identify suitable candidates. Businesses can also provide support and accommodations to help neurodivergent students succeed in their work-integrated learning placements, such as flexible work arrangements, assistive tech, and mentorship programs. By creating a supportive workplace culture, businesses can not only improve their accessibility practice, but also foster a stronger workforce that benefits all employees. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.